I want to acknowledge the mana whenua of this wāhi and waipapa taumata rau. Thank you for attending this session, especially since it's the last one of the day. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Ingarangi Mihingapoa, te whapapapa mai Ingare, kei Paitumokai, o I noho ana, ko Amanda Craddock toko ingoa. I'm a programs coordinator at Caritas. Nau mai to our session, Indigenous and local signals of change, receding taillights or indicators of a new direction. This session runs until 5 p.m. After our opening karakia, we will hear the introductions from the rest of the team. Our head of programs, Mrs. Nina Tue, will give a brief introduction. We will then share an overview of our mill journey. The main part of the session consists of recorded presentations from Mr. Kior Sopiak in Cambodia, Mr. Billy Mai in the Solomon Islands, Ms. Sema Rokodredre in Fiji, Ms. Judy Gilea, Ms. Charlotte Vada, Mr. Terry Lahi in Papua New Guinea, Father Isaiah Wairongai in Fiji. This will be followed by a summary from Associate Professor Gerard Princeton, our advisor on research and knowledges. Rachel Harrison and Matthew Papish will join Gerard to bring recent programmatic experience to your questions. Now for our opening karakia. Ki te ingoa tamatua, o te tamaiti, o te wairua tapu, amene. E te atua, e whakamoi miti, ana mātou ki a koe. Mō tō tiaki, ia mātou. Arahina mātou, I roto ia. Mātou mahi, e tēnei rā. Ko I hoa, tō mātou ariki, ake, amene. Ki te ingo o te matua, o te tamaiti, o te wairua tapu, amene. Let's hear from the rest of the team.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Netherlands tōku whenua, kei paraparumu au noho ana, ko Gerard tōku ingoa.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Maniapoto me Waikato tōku iwi, ko Matthew Papish tōku ingoa, tēnā koutou katoa.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Ka reiri iho ngā wai o te awa kairangi mai ngā takarepo o Rimataka, ke te whanganui atara tōku kāinga, ko Rachel Harrison tōku ingoa.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Ingarangi me Horana. Horana. Te whakapaparangi mai, enare ke te whanganui atara o e noho ana. He storyteller writer o ki I Caritas no Martin Dion toko ingoa.
Tēnā koutou katoa, wi aku te puna e wiwi, no wahaupai, hauangari, ina hau, ana auki, ti wanganui o tāra ina anai. Ko Phil Ross, taku ingoa. Hi, I'm Phil. I've been with Caritas for 5 years as a programs coordinator and slowly becoming a bit of a veteran of many big nets.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Ingarangi me Itari, te whakapaparanga mai, ke kaipara au e noho ana, ko Nina Tui au, tēnā tātou katoa.
Kia ora koutou. I have the great honour of giving a very brief introduction to who we are. So a little bit about Caritas and the program which relates to this presentation today. Caritas is love. We describe ourselves as love in action. The Latin word caritas gives us the English word charity, but it is an active love that seeks the good of others, especially the marginalised and oppressed. In Māori terms, it would be expressed as whakaaroha, a verb. Caritas Aotearoa New Zealand is the New Zealand Catholic Bishops' Agency for Justice, Peace and Development. We were established in 1969 to work for a world free of poverty and injustice by providing emergency aid, supporting authentic human development and justice at home and abroad. We tackle poverty through long-term development programs and address underlying injustices through advocacy, education, and formation of our supporters to care for both earth and people. We are members of a global confederation of more than 160 Catholic agencies, Caritas Internationalis, working in over 200 countries and territories around the world. It is the second largest humanitarian network after the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement. Through this presentation, we aim to share the experience and perspectives of our partners in developing local and contextual indicators of success, their measures of success and well-being, in our negotiated partnership with the New Zealand Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. This partnership, He Oranga Taurikura, a thriving life, is an integrated development program with 9 partners across 7 countries. Growing out of earlier programs and long-term relationships, it was developed through intensive discussions with our partners, deep analysis, and robust consultation with MFAT. Although activities in all locations look different according to local need and context, all have the same overarching long-term outcomes of increased community health and well-being and resilience. Underlying the program is the whakatauki, nā tōroro, nā takuroro, ka ora ai te iwi. With your fruit basket and my fruit basket, the people shall thrive.
I would like to acknowledge Te Pou Hauhua, who is not here with us today, but he named the work in consultation with other people to name our program He Oranga Taurikura. And the essence of what he was saying was that it is not just a name to be attached to documents, but it's a whole kaupapa and a whole way of working and aim, and just to treasure that. The Indigenous Mill Journey is part of the kaupapa of our He Oranga Taurikura program. Our focus on integral human development means that the core values of respect and the dignity of the human person are central to our programming. Caritas Aotearoa New Zealand gives priority to relationships where mutual trust has been built over many, many years, and in some cases spans more than 2 decades. As a result, these relationships mean we measure outcomes in a more meaningful way. We still have our results measurement tables, typical established indicators with, for example, percentage as a unit of proportion. In Caritas, there were conversations about including Indigenous indicators in our mill framework, and these conversations started with MFAT early in our negotiated partnership design process, which was several years ago. The Indigenous indicators make more sense to the communities we work with. In each local context, they are different. Indicators are culturally and contextually appropriate. Reporting on outcomes across 7 different cultural contexts in a programmatic way is more difficult. However, working with local partners to understand what these Indigenous indicators are, we have a deeper understanding of what matters most to them. What makes sense to them? And what does success look like to them and their communities? The knowledge about what constitutes a locally relevant, culturally appropriate indicator clearly doesn't lie with Caritas. The design of such indicators can only be led by our local partners on the ground in each individual country. Where are we up to? Our team is currently in the process of gathering these pieces of gold, culturally appropriate indicators. The response from some partners to these conversations has been interesting. For some partners, referencing local indicators has been a natural process. Other partners are skilled and practiced with years of reporting expectations that the question, what is meaningful to them, has taken them by surprise. All our partners have the same overarching long-term outcomes, even though activities in each country are different. So in preparation for the partner presentations that we're about to see, the main question was, for the people in your communities, what would be their locally meaningful indicators of community wellbeing and health and community resilience? Let's now have the recorded presentations.
The indicator for well-being and welfare, our target community understand that when the family have the food for support to the family member for eating, especially 3 meals a day, this is the full meaning of their understanding of well-being. For the welfare, of course, our target community, especially the indigenous people, they understand that when they have some income, they have saved some money to support their children to school, they have some money to participate in tradition or culture event, so that this is the full meaning of their understanding welfare. Of course, from the beginning, they have enough food for it, and then they will have some saving fund for support their family to attend other events that organized by indigenous people. So the well-being and welfare of our target community, especially IP people, know that first, they have 3 meals. The second, they will have some income and budget to help their children in terms of education, support children to school, support their children to have a good medicine to take care of the family, something like that. Yeah. And another thing related to the community resilience, our indigenous people understand that suppose that they have the capacity, they improve their capacity from day to day to cope to the negative impact of disaster. It means that they can improve their capacity to solve the problem, especially when their family or their community meet the disaster. So they can save the money, they can improve their capacity in terms of applying reasonable and appropriate technique in agriculture. So after the flood or the drought come, so the poor family, especially indigenous family, can grow their crop again and again in order to get a better yield to support the family. So after the disaster, they can cope, they can feed their family. So that is the full meaning of community resilience in this province. So in order to get effective well-being, welfare, and community resilience, our project in Ratnagiri, we try to help indigenous people to form agricultural cooperative, strengthen agricultural cooperative, also formulate producer group such as vegetable, rice, chicken, cattle, and cash crop producer group. Moreover, we consider to help the poor women to join together, becoming women cashew nut processing group. This is the special group that we support to the most poorest women. So women-headed household, widow, or who are living without any relatives. So the project select them into the women cashew nut processing group. Besides this, we also support them in terms of agricultural input, equipment, material, and of course the training costs that we provide to them in order to improve their capacity in terms of producing crop, vegetable, paddy rice, and other commodities. We are also supporting them the most important equipment such as local tractor, local truck, machinery, tractor, so that they can use our facility to support to the poor people. Our indigenous people, especially poor community in this province, they understand that well-being and welfare is not just improving the economy or income. That also the tradition and behavior of good behavior of indigenous people also include in that well-being and welfare of our indigenous people. That's why our project support target community, especially indigenous people, to implement communal land titling activity, which is support target community to receive communal certificate, and of course to maintain their identity as the indigenous people. So in this country, of course, we have Krung indigenous people, we have Tempun, we have Chorai, etc. That those people are indigenous people that the project need to consider and need to support them. So communal land titling activity is one of the most important activities that people can protect themselves from any powerful people that those sometimes they grab their land, they encroach their land, so that communal land titling can protect their land from those people. So not only protect their land and natural resource, they also maintain and keep their tradition and good behavior from their ancestors.
in this country, the level of knowledge varies. And the bigger percentage of the population is where the rural community is. Yeah, that we have a lot of people out in our rural community. And what it means to them to improve their physical status, to have benefits, to keep them going and doing things in their community. The importance is having skills that are injected to them, are given to them, and then with the utilization of the skills, that will help their well-being and also to live a healthy life, a physical, good, healthy life, you know, in their setting. And when it comes to community resilience, they look for the opportunity that was, you know, maybe forgotten, yeah, values, so that they can be able, you know, to have them back, you know, the values that, yeah. The original mission of the churches that have established the rural training centers or the TVET schools is for training them, these youths who are pushed out from the formal system, training them, and also those who in the communities do not have access to go to formal education, coming in to train them on the practical approach and get back with the skills into their rural settings where the population is. And utilizing those skills, sharing them for the benefit of the community to what they have on the ground, the relevancy of the access they have, either it's like agriculture or whatever. This is the mission of the churches, so that they become good citizens. Self-dependency, you know, not driven, but they have the skills to do something. The churches believe very much that this is the type of development we would like every Solomon Islander to access, to become good citizens. After they were not taken on board, but then and also they are out in the community, and we touch them through the skills program. They discover their value potential as a person. And that is a very big, powerful motivation, you know, in any human person. When he discovers the value and that he can do this. That's where the participation comes in. They started to share the knowledge and the skills, and that improves their well-being and to become good citizens, you know, of the community. And with the spiritual doctrines that are injected in from the RTC training, because the churches run the RTC, that to us is a very big input for our rural communities and our young people coming into the RTC sector. The result of the understanding what RTCs are doing, offering benefits down to the rural communities. Thank you.
The main objective of this work with community-based women, community-based organization is to increase the inclusivity and participation of women in the decision-making process. WATSIP always believe that these practices of democracy or the participation of women should start from their own CBO, which means they are able to question and demand transparencies and accountability from their leaders, and at the same time, they do take, they do also demand this accountability and transparency within members themselves in terms of the moving on, or in terms of the progressing of the CBOs. So from the grassroots level, where we have to work with their plan of action as a community level, their own plan of action, they have moved on to the inter-district level, where they have to raise to the government or the local government level about the issues that they face with service delivery. So holding the community together, this is where the women are in terms of handling well all the plan of action that has been taken place in the community. And by that, it is because of the governance, or the practices of democracy that they have. Keep on practicing that even in the CBOs, and now most of them are being able to voice their opinion and raise their concern in the village meeting, which was something they had plenty of the women who were never been doing that before. But now, going through the empowerment process with the empowerment of women on the ground, and also with the practices of democracy being practiced by the women in the various CBOs, and it's monitored through using the monitoring forms, we are able to track, and we were able to know which CBO is active and which is not on the ground. And also at the same time being able to sit and raising their issues, and it's not a project talking about our services can be better in the rural areas, especially to the women's group. We were, for CP, it is a big achievement in terms of trying to prove that women through empowerment training that we have been doing are able to move on their own. They were able to raise their issues with relevant stakeholders. They can now move on their own. They can now work on their own rather than like before, when they depended on SIP to do everything for them. But now, the office bearers and the women's group that are the 6 CBOs on the ground, they are now ready to move on their own. And when they need assistance or support now from SIP, then they will come back to us and ask for that assistance. Otherwise, they are okay on the ground. So that also opened up a space for us to move on to other communities that need us to work with them in terms of practices of democracy, and also accountability and transparency in the work that we are doing on the ground.
Indicators, how to measure. We are measuring success indicators culturally in Zimbabwe. Okay, and we decided that we should differentiate them by having the traditional values, so that we compare it with the modern values. Then after the project, we want to see if there are some changes. Okay, so one of the traditional values is the families. Clansmen have fewer problems. So in the traditional times, when people see that that particular group of people are peaceful, peace-loving people, they are a community that does not fight, they have good people living in the community, all the other activities begin there. So when the women and children and people in the community see that that particular family is clan is a peaceful family, then there's a lot of good things generating in that village or that community. Okay? And people value that. People value a peaceful community. The next one is females, mothers, daughters have health and fertility. Okay, in the traditional times, women, they bear children. So when the people from the other clan or from the other side of the community see that that particular woman is healthy and she's able to bear good children, so that that particular clan, the generation continues. So it is a kind of a value that they value there, that when they see that, oh, there's a young girl there, or there's a strong woman there, okay. Every eyes of the community is on that woman, so that woman is married to that particular clan, so that the generation continues. Okay, the next one is male strength and health. It also involves, because this also attribute to the leadership of the community. If the male has a lot of strength and if he's in good health, he maintains the community. Okay, stability and family connections. Yes, like there is a family connection being tied together. The household is at peace, and also in that particular community that we are trying to go, Karamui, the girls at the age of 8 to 9, they entertain them through betrothal marriage. Like they do not go to school. They are at the age of 7 or 8. These girls are engaged to elderly men at the age of 42, 43. So the girls, they left school. So these kind of family connections are there, and there is forced marriage. It's the girls, they do not have the intention to go back to school. So it continues in that particular place. And then also the family wealth and animal resources of the community contributes to the chiefness or the wealthiness of that particular person or the king or chief. Or that's how it's also valued in the community. So these are some of, not all of them, but some of the values that we have in Zimbabwe traditionally. And in the modern time now, people are compared, or they are classified by family education, the level of education achieved by the family members. Other community members, they value them. And then decent houses or homes, dressing type of clothing, personal hygiene and cleanliness, healthy nutritious meals daily, personal positive participation in community, or improvised farming with new knowledge, innovative skills into the family, or accessible water supply. These are some of the things that is happening right at the moment, and people value them very much. But to look at these two sections, the project that we are trying to take it down there, they are here. They value this. Other parts of Zimbabwe, we value that. So that's why after the end of the project, we want to see these people here moving to that side. Thank you.
Government official from MFAT or somebody from the UN, you would probably use numbers, percentages. But if you're talking to a Papua New Guinean, what kind of language do you use? And the funny thing was, the three of us had exactly the same answer. Wow. We didn't know how to put it into words. So this is our attempt to put it into words, and I'll let Terry go through each one of them.
Okay, so we have here the point number one is passive doona. Actually, we look at it is a culture of sharing. Like we all came into different countries and the same province, but we have different way we share doing things in the culture, the custom ways and all this. And then we have number one, number two. Bulletin point we say one bad passing. If we coordinate with the communities or the villages, example, we have to come up to the point of agreement. If they agree, we agree, and then we will, if we say we want to do this one, if you agree, I agree, okay, that will be okay. we appoint them. So we say, in inclusive, we say one per person. Okay? And then bulletin point number 3, we have personal interaction with the communities. Your interaction towards the communities, your way of doing things with the communities, that they value. So from there, they will have the common understanding of they accept what you want to do on this. So we come up with all these bulletin points. We have many, but like she's
So if you had to like explain to your grandmother or your auntie the successful project that you did, you're not going to say, oh, this percent of this. You're going to talk along the lines of how is the community doing now? Did they accept you? How do they see you or your team? So things like that. Put them into indicators now.
That's another workshop. That's another workshop.
Any comments?
Thank you. My name is Father He Oranga. I work here in the Tuturu Training Center. I'm a marriage priest. I'm residing here in Tutu. Just to elaborate a little bit about some of the meaningful indicators that are known for us here. According to what we do here, local meaningful indicators would be under the understanding the person is a good citizen and a person who is well versed with its cultural roots and tradition with its richness, and are open to ongoing formations, growth and relationship. The understanding the role of good stewards of God's creation, that is looking after the creation that is around here, the care for the people in the earth and all it contains. On a deeper level, it's about learning from our ancestors on the local knowledge of survival and growth on every aspect of family as well as communal life in the village setting. These are some of the indicators that points us to fully understand our role as a human being and appreciate life as it comes. On the community level of well-being and health, we as village-based community are grounded with the strong ties that binds us together in the relationship on the family level and also communal level. On this matter, one of the clear indicators of well-being is about empowering local people on their role in the community and their well-being, upholding traditional lifestyle using the local natural foods resource that is available as daily routine of meals and enhancing healthy eating habits, empowering people on food security and planting more local climate resilient crops that is sustainable in the near future. This has been passed down to us for ages from our forefathers, and we are encouraging young youths of today to continue on what has been passed down to us, and encouraging people on healthy lifestyle, eating vegetables for healthy life and growth. On the area for community resilience, an example of community resilience when people continue to build on reconnecting with families and bonding, and also enhancing sustainability with regards to creation, the land, the people that we live in a community-based or village-based situations. So there's setting rules and regulations in the village structure to empower people to move on in life and learn from different angles of life as they move on.
So I think that is just brief on little things that we as a local-based community will encounter day by day as life goes on. Lanka.
Kia ora. I was asked to try to make a few sort of contextual remarks around the clips that you've just watched. It's my privilege to pick two, and I would like to start those two, use those two as starters for the conversation. The first is, you have been looking at history. Amanda said these relationships are 20 years old. That's because she is not very old. These relationships are 186 years old. They go back to the earliest Catholic network building, relationship building in the Pacific. When the Catholic Bishop Pompallier came to New Zealand in 1838, I think, he didn't come straight to New Zealand. He went via Fiji, the Gambier Islands, Wallis, Futuna, Cook Islands, then he arrived here. When in 1842, I think, on the island of Futuna, a Catholic priest was murdered, Pierre Chanel, Pompallier sent a boat from New Zealand to pick up the body of Chanel in Futuna and bring him back to be interred back home in France. These are stories about networks and connections and people across the Pacific that bring Aotearoa in that network. So what you're looking at here are very, very old stories and connections and networks. That's the first thing. People listen to each other with that history in mind. The second thing I would like to add as a context is the word indicators. Of course, as we've seen, that appeared regularly here. In the program, we've had, at a, let's say, sort of technical level in negotiations with MFAT, let's say, a lot of hard-nosed kanohi ki te kanohi, face-to-face discussions about what it is that we need to report on. It's a $10 million program, 7.5 from the New Zealand taxpayer, 2.5 from the Catholic community in New Zealand. Reporting must take place. For clarity's sake, you must report every 6 months. We have a huge scheme, I don't know how many pages, probably 160 pages of reporting requirements in all these 9 partnerships. There are 2 sets of indicators. MFAT suggested to us that we pick from a list of 231 that are called mandatory indicators. Now, they have been devised by very specialized people in New York by the UN bodies. They are the SDG indicators. So like in a candy shop, you pick and choose. This looks colorful enough, this looks colorful enough. But these indicators reflect values from, I would argue, and we would argue as a team, the global north, urban, well-educated, middle-class people. What is an indicator of wealth, for example? Let's look at that. Is a child an indicator of wealth or poverty? Who knows? Is a child an indicator of a wealth or poverty? Depends on the context. Okay. Let me rephrase it then and make it easier. Having 12 children, is that an indicator of poverty or an indicator of wealth? Okay, let me rephrase it again. If you have 12 children in New Zealand, is that an indicator of poverty or wealth? Ah, now we're talking. It depends on the cultural background. For many Pākehā value systems, 12 children in a house is an overcrowded house, all sorts of problems on income and poverty, etc. These are value systems from an urban global north, if you want, and they appear on the list of 231. When we have to report on the He Oranga Taurikura program, we are reporting on these indicators that may or may not be relevant to our partners. In the negotiations with MFAT, they said, look, we acknowledge that there are two sorts of indicators. There are the locally, culturally meaningful indicators, and there are the mandatory indicators. Could you please make sure that within 6 months you have agreed with your partners what are the mandatory indicators for each of the programs? And please make a baseline study so you can report on progress in these mandatory indicators. Many of the staff are still struggling to get the baseline for that. It's hard. That was the first thing that MFAT was interested in, and that's what a lot of pressure is put on the staff to report on those. At the same time, MFAT said, and I was in that meeting and I was really sort of baffled, yes, we are also sort of okay with you collecting data on the indigenous or locally meaningful indicators, but do that second. Make sure you do the mandatory indicators first. Establish a baseline, select them and report on them. We're 1.5 years into the program by now, nearly 2 years, and we are still talking with our partners what these locally meaningful indicators are. And there's a tension between these two. If you remember, I think Judy in P&G talking about what is a healthy woman. Do you remember what she said? Fertility. What's a healthy man? Strong. How do you sort of, what's an indicator of fertility? Coming back to the children, of course. That would sit probably a bit awkwardly with the mandatory indicators on health. I am not sure how this will work out. I think this comes back to Uma Katari's presentation on the history of how things get grafted onto each other. We may think that we can have a coexistence of these mandatory MFAT indicators, urban, global north, and these indigenous, locally meaningful indicators. We may think they can coexist. Why don't we just report on both of them? Then we keep the partners happy, MFAT is happy, everybody is happy, right? It's a win-win-win for everyone. The question is whether that's possible. Can we have a set of values, for example, from Te Ao Māori? Can they coexist with a set of values, Mataranga, if you want, Western science debates? What are the possibilities for these two worldviews, not just to coexist, but to have a meaningful conversation with each other? And this is, again, where relationships come in, where partnerships come in. I think what we're trying to do in the program is perhaps use the indicators as a sort of an excuse or a reason to have that conversation about two value systems. That is not an easy conversation. And I think, again, as Uma indicated, that conversation takes place in a historical context of a colonial relationship. It is not realistic, I think, to sit down with partners and say, look, let's have an open conversation about your indicators and my indicators. If Caritas Aotearoa is the party that is the intermediary to $10 million, one party comes to the conversation table with a lot of money. That will affect the dynamic in the relationship. It doesn't mean that the partner is powerless. A lot of the international NGOs, and Caritas is no exception, need these local partnerships for its own existence as well. And I think Caritas is in a very fortunate position because it has a long-standing, 183-year-old relationship with these partners. So we have a sort of a slightly different relationship, I think, with these partners. But money is a factor that sort of affects the relationship. Having two sets of indicators is an excuse, a reason to have a conversation, and we're having that conversation. I think shortly Rachel and Matthew will come here as well and share with you a bit about the experiences they had about these conversations. How does it take place? And I think we should just leave it at that for the time being. Okay. Could you just join me here? Yep. So maybe the two of you, could you share a few thoughts on your recent conversations about indicators?
Sure. Kia ora everyone. So yeah, we've been lucky enough in the last 6 months that the borders have opened again between myself and Phil, Matthew and Martin as well, to get around all 7 partner countries and 9 partner organisations within those countries. So additional to the countries you saw today, we've also got Timor-Leste, Kiribati and Tonga are part of our program as well. So in each of those 7 countries, we've been having these conversations with our partners. Some of the footage has come from those conversations, some of it's come subsequently. So really it was sitting down with them and talking kind of how Gerard has just talked about this idea of what looking at indicators a different way. And as Amanda alluded to at the start, for some, this has been easy. This is stuff that they're already thinking about, stuff that they've already been doing off their own bat anyway. And for some other partners, they're kind of saying, well, don't we just do what we've always reported on and things like that. So the conversations of how these things have gone have been different with every partner. In some places like Timor-Leste, for example, they had an existing tool that they use, a survey type thing with communities, but it's now actually thinking about, are the questions in those actually relevant anymore? There's no point we're saying to our partners in their communities, there's no point collecting information that doesn't mean anything to you. Collecting it just for a donor reporting purpose, if it doesn't actually mean anything in your communities. So I think for me, the biggest takeaway from all the partners that I've spoken to about this is the real heavy emphasis, on the impact on the community of activities. So, for example, we saw Billy Mai from the Solomon Islands Association of Vocational and Rural Training Centres, and also Father Isaiah, who's from Tutu Rural Training Centre in Fiji. And I think we work with these rural training centres on strengthening the training for the students. And I think a common indicator of success, which, as an aside, success, progress, achievement, a lot of our partners balk at those words. Like, those words that's not, we have to tread very carefully about how we say, has this been successful, or what have you achieved? And that is just not how they talk a lot of the time. So we're really trying to reframe everything we're doing. But, I just got away from what I was saying. So a lot of the kind of mandatory indicators of, a student's done their training at a rural training centre, have they got a job? Is there more income in the household? These types of things. That's not important to them. It's how has that strengthened their connection to their community, the relationship between the training centre and the community? What benefits have they taken home to their family, to their wider community? And those are hard things to measure. We're not denying that at all, but those are the important things. And I think it's getting around to really thinking about those, as opposed to if we said, great, you've finished your course at a rural training centre, how much are you earning now? Not important for them. So that's my little takeaway. I'll let Matt speak, and then we're happy to answer any questions that people have. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Yeah, I will speak mainly to Papua New Guinea because I didn't visit any of the other countries. But I'd just like to bring the focus back to the underlying whakatauki that sort of is the connecting philosophy, I think, for the overarching program of He Oranga Taurikura. The whakatauki no te roru, naku te roru, ka ora ai te iwi is about with my basket and your basket and my fruit and your fruit. Together we can exchange fruit, and then we can also observe each other's baskets. The metaphor of the basket is really, it sits well in the Pacific, I think, and particularly in Papua New Guinea. In Papua New Guinea, there's 800 languages, and as Terry explained, even in one small village location, there are four cultures with 4 customs that are completely different ways of being. And so they have their billams, from all around Papua New Guinea that kind of represent their baskets. And so the idea and how this connects to kind of the conversation that I was having in Papua New Guinea is that it's really for them to tell us what their value set is so that we can then move towards evaluating and know how to go about evaluating so that they're sort of centered in designing what that looks like. So in terms of what Judy was saying, she talked about the traditional value set and the modern value set, and I think that sort of leads to the second part of how we can think about the whakatauki and how it is incorporated in our work. In that it's not for us to tell them to change their value set, it's for us to have our value set, for them to have their value set, and then for them to sort of decide how they move forward through that. And so that's kind of the relationality of it. And I think there's also something to be said. I was listening to the session earlier this morning about relational accountability, and I think that's really kind of what Charlotte was getting at. You know, when you talk to your auntie, how did the community receive you? You know, that's what's important for them in that community, just in Kirima on the south coast of Papua New Guinea. Kia ora, if there's any questions.
We've got about 15 minutes if people have questions. There was a speedy hand up.
I'm really qualified. I work for MFAT, but I'm also, you know, like a human person, so I think that's probably about what I'm about to say. I think also I'm here in my capacity as, you know, MFAT and as Sonny Peters, who comes from the north. I've been interested in the decolonisation kaupapa that we've been speaking about today. And I also think that for many of us in the north, we make decisions about where we work, and the keynote, Professor Umi, spoke about that, how you reconcile your personal opinions and your mahi. I work for PDG, I work in PDG, so lots of my mahi is around how we implement international development cooperation, right? But the decisions that you don't get to make sometimes are where you whakapapa to, or who you're born to. So lots of our esteemed peer over here, when she was talking about the colonisation experience, for Ngāpuhi, lots of that has been negatively reaffirmed through the church. And I have a question, which I've written, because I'm going to get sidetracked. The role of religious NGOs in reaffirming that negative colonial experience, and whether, when we're talking about this decolonisation of development, and the idea that actually real empowerment comes from the ideas of land bank. Where I come from, we don't get land, it was given to the church. So is that something that Caritas has, when you think about the Indigenous and local signals for New Zealand, for change, for Aotearoa, is that something that you actively consider? You know, that can make a huge difference.
Kia ora. Thank you. I'd like to take two sort of aspects from your question to respond to that I'm kind of understanding. I think the first aspect is about spirituality and the imposition of a sort of Catholic spirituality on potentially a location that doesn't have a Catholic spirituality. And I think in that sense, for us in New Zealand, it's very particular with Bishop Pompallier having asserted the 4th article of the treaty. Recognising that as I think is an ongoing piece of work that we are doing within our organisation to try align ourselves with those principles, particularly the 4th article that was sort of suggested by Bishop Pompallier, and that has like a spiritual component to it as Catholics as well, because we view that as a covenant that has a spiritual significance over and above a sort of legal significance. And then in terms of the context of the second conversation about land back, this is an area that Caritas has worked on or worked in before. Particularly there was a project in about 2005 2005 to 2015, around that time period where we got all the churches across New Zealand at a diocesan level and also at a parish level to review the history of how they came to own their land. And from that project, there were a couple instances where land was returned, ownership of land was returned, but that project didn't get finished, to be perfectly honest. Yeah.
Can I just jump in and add something there? I can't talk so well to the within Aotearoa context, that sits outside of me for sure, but in terms of our working within the Pacific, the Catholic nature of it for us is a massive, it's a network thing, you know, it gives us, that sounds a terrible thing to say, but in the countries we work in, we work with the church networks, which I'm sure everyone knows in the Pacific, almost everyone is religious. So those church networks give us huge reach across the countries that we work in. You know, Kiribati, Tonga, Solomon Islands, right across the really far away islands. It gives us more ability through our local partners who have those massively existing church networks across the island. It gives us a really good opportunity to reach those communities which often don't get touched. And in terms of the kind of Catholic background to the work, it's based on Catholic social teaching, which actually is just good development principles. It's not that Catholic in its existence anyway. It's things like participation, stewardship, human dignity, common good, those types of things. So I think, yeah, totally hear what you're saying. I think in the Pacific, that the church network gives us a good opportunity to reach people, and it's not kind of whatever that word is. So it's more kind of the background to how we work in the principles and stuff.
There's just one example in the Diocese of Bougainville, and I just want to honour Bishop Inabali, who's passed away. But something that he was doing within that diocese was returning land to the rightful owners, and Caritas was supporting that by helping with the legal fees and the titling back to that. So that's a very small example of a beginning. Kia ora.
Oh yeah, and on that point, the land titling, which was mentioned in Cambodia as well, that's something that has been happening in the past as well. So.
Kia ora. Thank you so much for the presentation. I agree. Hearing those voices is just really powerful. So thanks for sharing. My name's Natalie Slade. I work in the mill team at MFAT, so just disclosure. So yeah, I was really interested in hearing your experiences, I guess, working with your partners around mill. And look, I have not been involved in any of the negotiated partnerships, and I know there's a lot of workshopping around areas of change and frameworks. I can't speak to that, but I just want to comment on the values and principles that underlie our work, in the mill team at MFAT. And I've been at MFAT for about 3 years, and I've never heard of these 240 mandated indicators. It's not something I would ever share with people, even if they did exist, so I don't know where that came from.
There's a leaflet, PDG issues it.
Oh, I didn't know.
I'm just saying there is a list that says mandatory indicators, and there's a whole shebang of them, and that's passed on to 2019.
Sorry?
2019.
Results, yeah, okay. So I think it's a bit of a historical element to those mandated indicators. Basically how I do a lot of advisory work at MFAT around mill, and I always stipulate, always advise people around mill frameworks that are fit for purpose, culturally appropriate, meaningful. What's the point of collecting information that is not meaningful, right? Why would you do that? It doesn't make any sense, and I would never advocate for that. So I just wanted to kind of throw that in as a comment that myself and my team, do not advocate for mandated indicators. There are lots of SDG indicators, but as we know across the Pacific, SDG indicators are actually just not really helpful. Often the data doesn't exist to begin with, so it makes them really, really hard to collect. And I've seen mill frameworks that have got so many indicators in them that they're just absolutely impossible to operationalise. And it just, in the end, if they're not used, they're not meaningful. And so feasible, meaningful, used, are kind of, yeah. And so
And I was just in Suva last week at the Pacific Community do a Pacific Male Strengthening Program, and so they had a convening of Pacific partners. And there was a lot of discussions around what does a Pacific Male approach look like, you know, and then we had people from across the Pacific, and of course it's going to look very differently depending on where you're from, you know, and what's meaningful to you. And so there was some really rich discussion there, you know, about this very topic. And so yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there that I'm sorry that you've had that experience, you know, with Mel. I see Mel as a really powerful storytelling tool to tell that story of development and the difference that this project might be making for the people, or if it's not working, we have the evidence to say it's not working, right? And you know, a tool for development effectiveness. And so, yeah, I mean, like I say, I can't comment on your experiences with the negotiated partnerships. I think those happened a few years ago, maybe before I arrived. But yeah, we don't advocate for that approach normally. So yeah.
Thank you. Regina.
Kia ora, thanks for your presentations, but yeah, and especially for hearing from partners all over the place, and just for full disclosure, I'm on the Development and Relief Committee of Caritas, so go on 4 times a year to find out about what's going on with programs and sometimes provide some advice on things. I found it really interesting as well as has really been commented on the relational aspects to partnerships that some of these partners commented on. And so this morning in the session some of us had on tourism, we had Dr. Sam Manuela, who's a psychologist, specific psychologist from here at Auckland University, commenting on how we've designed a framework of to measure well-being across a number of dimensions, and that might be referring to earlier, right, when he was talking about the whole thing with the Indigenous knowledge around the bar, the relational space in which people connect, and that essentially if people's connections are good, that's a sign that well-being's good, that's a sign that development's right, if it's working with that. So when hearing from Charlotte and Terry, and Charlotte was saying about, from Caritas PNG as well, I believe, yeah, that thing about how is the community, did they accept you, how did they accept your team, that type of thing. I thought that's so interesting because it's kind of also speaking to, you know, the different types of accountabilities. Gerard, you were mentioning how we have to, you know, be accountable for, any NGO has to be accountable for the funding to those who funded programs. But the downward accountability, it says something about downward accountability as well. How do people feel about it? And again, because of this role I've had with Caritas, I once went over 3 times to Tanzania to look at a partner doing a gender program, and went for the end of term evaluation with a small team. I was the only person from outside the area. The other 2 were Maasai women on the team doing the evaluation. And we had men in these communities saying to us, oh man, we love this CORDS program, we love this local NGO that's being funded. When they turn up, when we see them coming to do training once a month, we go around and tell all the women, hurry up, get along, they're coming to provide the training. Don't be late, get along there. And they were also cooking for the evaluation. There were so many signs that they had a good relationship with those who were delivering the programs that were part of this gender program. And it was just like, yeah, if we could find ways that, yes, indicators around relationships seem to show so much and be locally meaningful. So I don't know if you've got any other comments on that, but it seems like a number of the partners seem to be saying that relationship aspect is key.
I think almost all of them. Probably all of them. Like it's been the most common bit of feedback for sure on that relationship connection stuff. So,
And it makes
we'll look
sense.
forward to seeing what you come up with for the actual.
So do we.
But it makes total sense because what's going on today is the result of work that's been going on for 20 years at least. And as I said, probably a lot longer if you take a bit of a step back on history. So that matters.
Kia ora. Thank you. I was just wondering from, you know, you say you've had, you know, that you've had these relationships for a very long time, but from a position and potentially imbalance of power, if you don't have the same culture talking with you and to you, you're not generally, or you may not be receiving their true feelings, answer, values, because there's a whole system of when we are speaking with an imbalance of power, we may be too scared to bring forward what we actually want. So do you guys take that into consideration when you're building these relationships? And when I look at the people on your team here today, and I'm not trying to degrade at all,
Totally.
but you're not, you don't look like them.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think what I'll say is that we didn't even start these conversations until we could be in the same location with them in country. You know what I mean? There was we were never going to try and start this stuff online, like during COVID. That was just actually impossible. We think all the time about that question you've just asked, like literally all the time, because I'm not Tongan, I'm not from Kiribati, I don't, and it's building those relationships to start with. And even if we have a relationship for 10, 20 years, the issue is never going to go away. So it's something that we...
Kind of decolonisation process within your recruitment process within your team.
Oh, I really can't talk to recruitment, sorry.
Or maybe that's something
Yeah.
that could be potentially thought of for the future.
Can I just say, it's not really in the recruitment process, but it is in the approach that we try and take with our partners. So we find often it's the conversations we have in the truck or the conversations in the evening sharing dinner together. Aside from the formal meetings and the discussions we have with our partners and with the communities that we're with, it's a chance for them to feed back to us in a way that's not quite so visible, to try and tease out the conversations that they're comfortable with. Often, in some places, it's via a translator, which we acknowledge again that is full. So we certainly acknowledge it and take it into account, but also we do our very best to make sure we're available and to encourage those conversations to flow freely. And it means sometimes very long days, spending time with people. It's the time aspect when you're with them, often outside of the formal settings, that you get to have those genuine conversations and hear what's really going on, and allow them to be very honest with us as well, and that's not always easy.
Can I just stick up for Caritas for a moment here? Because I think in the INGO sector, Caritas is one of the organisations I see that has tried hardest to recruit Pacifica and Māori people into their development team, into their organisation, and they haven't always been successful recruitments and people have left also, but the effort is there. As well, in the decolonisation space, Caritas is one of the INGOs, is the INGO that we look at that has made a real effort in terms of building a relationship with iwi, that has taken what it means to be an INGO in New Zealand earlier than any other INGO in this country. So, give yourself credit for what you're doing, because honestly, you are a shining light in this area of decolonisation. So don't talk yourselves down, Caritas.
Noted. Kia ora. Do you want to do an online one?
Sorry, one more question maybe, and then it's okay.
Thank you so much. Can I just commit to what you're saying before, Matthew, around how in Papua New Guinea there's so many different languages and different customs? To actually, so if you're accounting for all of those languages and customs, how do you put that into a framework?
I think it's a very particular problem, potentially, and quite an interesting one, I think. One of the conversations that I had with Charlotte was sort of talking about some of the local indicators that we have in Aotearoa, and a lot of the sort of Indigenous indicators that we have around like water quality and river health include Māori words, because there's some words in Māori that just can't be translated well, and that is the same case in Papua New Guinea, and so it's really interesting, as they were saying, that they had the same idea, but they didn't really have the words to describe them, and what they said was the common language in Papua New Guinea, Pidgin English, is very lexically constrained, and so they're actually thinking about sort of new words that might translate easily to the local languages in the 3 locations that we're in. So I think there's 2 things there. One is that the Pidgin English language is quite difficult because of its constraints. The second is that we're doing the results management framework in English. And the third thing is that there's 800 languages in the country, and even in so that we're working in 5 locations, and all of them would have different languages, and some of them would have multiple sets of different languages. This is, again, I think, where the strength of the church comes in, and not like a church of expats, but there are, so within Caritas Papua New Guinea, they're working with the diocese, and the diocese have people from those particular locations who know those particular languages, and so the national office can work with the local diocesan staff who you saw up there to figure out how to describe these values in a way that they can then put into their data collection methods in a way that would allow them to actually get at some of these questions. Yeah. Kia ora.
Kia ora. We probably better. Oh, do you want to do the online one first?
Yeah.
Cool.
I think the decolonization of data, I can speak to that,
okay.
in the sense that by working with partners to come up with data, indicator sets that are meaningful to them, and they can use. I mean, it's the idea of why would you collect data if it's only for reporting upward? If it helps local parties to just see whether they're getting where they want to get, then it's, for me, it's decolonizing data collection. Arguably, MFAT doesn't even need to know what sort of numbers are being generated, or what units are being used. They wouldn't have a voice or a say in that. So that's, for me, the decolonization of data collection. Leave it to local people to determine what is counted and what value it has. And happy to inform MFAT about what that is, but that's it.
You don't need to inform us, Jared. We're already having these conversations.
And we're learning through this as we go. Like, we don't have answers.
Yeah. But, you know, these are conversations that I have with my colleagues all the time.
Yeah.
But the essence of decolonization is leaving it to local communities or local parties to determine what they want to count and what the value is.
And it's a learning for us. Like, being here is a learning for us. You know, all of these sessions and stuff as well. So.
Could I just add to that? I think for us, about a year ago, I went to a launch of a report on racism called the Whakatika Report. One of the key advisors on that report was Sister Makareta Tawaroa, who's one of our partners on the Whanganui Awa. And I think that was a great example of how we can look at designing reports that are easy to read, understandable, and have that as their benchmark of what a successful piece of research is. So, yeah.
Just one more comment. I mean, we talk about decolonizing data, but on the flip side of that is also Indigenous data sovereignty. It's the Indigenous peoples and peoples of a particular community who decide what's important, what should be counted, what's going to be shared. And that's based on relational accountability. They have more trust in you over actually information with you. So maybe we need to be flipping that conversation to Indigenous data sovereignty or data sovereignty. Do you guys have information? What's going to be done with it? How's it going to be used?
Yeah, totally right.
100%.
Yeah, we've got a project coming up in the North Hokianga, and it's exactly that. We're talking data sovereignty with them, which is so that's been very, very early stages, but those conversations are definitely coming in. Yeah.
I just had a question to say. I feel like I'm missing with the context, and forgive me if I don't fully understand the context of the work that you're doing. But did the conversation start out with what do we want to, what is this partnership about? How would you like to see your community evolve, or are you completely happy with it as now? I mean, I feel like it's like indicators of what. Before we have indicators, we have to have a direction of that the partnership is going, well, what we may or may not want to do together. And then the indicators follow. I was just surprised why you started with indicators, but probably there is something that came before that.
Yeah, so
What came before us?
Yeah, we've worked with these partners for a long time, and they've got, I guess, areas of expertise, if you will, or community needs that they're working towards, and projects and things like that. So we know the activities we're doing with them through a lot of conversations and work over years, and then it's figuring out the indicators for those, essentially. Phil and Amanda might be able to speak to that more. They were involved a bit earlier than me, but I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
The design of the activities we're doing at the moment was done a little while ago, and they were pretty orthodox in one sense, identifying gaps, needs. We are working with often very remote and in many sense quite poor communities, often indigenous communities, often on the peripheries physically and socially. So these are long-term development programs that don't get fixed with one pivot or one SDF or one renegotiated partnership. They're long-term, so our relationships are also very long-term. So these needs have been identified and articulated through design documents with our partners fully involved in these conversations. So they've been quite keen on articulating the needs in their own communities as well. Where we've gone with this particular program, where we're going with this part of work, is to identify underneath that what are some of the things that they see are important to measure. Because when you identify the gaps and the needs, it becomes pretty traditional analysis. Nothing wrong with that. We've identified some quite pressing needs in some communities. However, what we're measuring then to what it looks like, what's important to them, and the outcome side of it is where we're really trying to dig a bit deeper and understand what's actually important beyond the orthodox answers to the orthodox understanding what the gaps are under the tradition. There is some quite classic traditional design processes that have been followed as well.
Kia ora. Okay, I might just close now so everyone can get to the reception, because I can see people getting antsy, and I would be doing the same, so no worries. Okay, kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te atawhai o tō tātou ariki a ihu karaiti, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga ki te wairua tapu, ake, amene. Kia ora.